I had this fantasy that I could just stand here and things would get quieter and quieter and more awkward. And then like 3 hours later, people are like, what's going to happen? Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Paul Ohm. I am an associate professor here. I'm also now the associate dean, which is a horrible fate to befall on anyone. No. And I'm also the, most significantly for today, the director of the IT and IP initiative here at the Silicon Flatiron Center for Law, Technology, and Entrepreneurship. Welcome to the 7th, I couldn't believe there have been 7 of these, annual privacy conference, but with a twist, which is you may not hear a lot about privacy today. Privacy will always be in the background, but this is an attempt to kind of have a really rich, broad conversation about important issues. And we're so glad that you came out here to join us. We're so glad that all of our speakers came out here to join us. I'm going to say a few words. I'm going to pass it over to a good friend and co-sponsor, and then we're going to get right into the first panel. So the Silicon Flatiron Center does tons of conferences, but every year we kind of pull out the stops for 2 conferences, this conference and the February Digital Broadband Migration. And the theory is not only are we going to kind of engage the public policy issues of the day, but we're also going to get amazing scholars and academics who will submit papers for our newly renamed, this is, I think, the very first issue of the Colorado Technology Law Journal. We're out of witness protection. This used to be called the Journal on Telecommunications and High-Tech Law, which didn't have the word Colorado in it. And we said, you know what, let's embrace the brand, and let's kind of simplify and talk about what we do so well. So in my hot little hands here, I'm holding Volume 12, Issue 2, and I saw Ethan in here a second ago. Ethan, where are you? Ethan is the editor-in-chief of this fine journal and helped bring this to fruition. This one is the volume that came out of last year's conference entitled The New Frontiers of Privacy Harm. And looking at the cover just now, I'm amazed by the caliber and level of people we got to write for this. I saw them present these amazing papers. There's papers by a fellow named Ryan Kalo and another by some guy named Omer Tene. These are both speakers who are back for another round this year. So I commend this to you. Are we selling issues out there, Ethan? No, we're not. We're giving them away. So if you give me $5, I can tell you where to find a copy of this, or you can probably find them yourself. So that's the purpose of today. Today is both discourse, discussion, debate about this really interesting set of topics, but it's also an opportunity to highlight some really interesting and provocative thinkers with a twist. So this year, in mid-June, when something happened that you'll hear a lot about today that's known as the emotional contagion study, when this happened, there were about 400 blog posts in the space of about 4 or 5 days by people commenting on this. And so me, being the lazy person who had not picked a topic for this conference yet, said, why don't I just invite the authors of the 7 most interesting blog posts I read, ask them to triple the length of their blog posts and publish it with us. And to my wonderful surprise, almost all of them said yes. And so the speakers you hear today, this is a different model for us, are professors but also bloggers who first injected their voice into this debate in that fun and freewheeling medium. It also means that this may be the record for a Silicon Flatirons conference in terms of fewest lawyers on the panel, which I'm sure you will all be happy about. Yes, power to the non-lawyers. And so, without delaying too much, the other thing I have to say is, if you look at all of the interesting blog and blog-like and academic things written about this topic, only one piece was actually written in 2013, and that's because Ryan Kalo started talking about this kind of confusing world of private companies conducting research back before we even heard about the emotional contagion study. And so Ryan's prescience, and not only that, but the kind of specific prescription that he had, and we'll get to more of this when he speaks later in the day, really spurred me and lots of other people to think about this before it was even really on most people's radar. And so for that reason, when I decided to do this topic, the first person I called was Ryan Kalo, and I said, Ryan, you must be at this conference, and thankfully he said yes. And I said, and more to the point, I would really love it if the amazing tech policy lab that you've set up at the University of Washington would co-sponsor, and thankfully he agreed to do that as well. And so again, Ryan is here not only because he's an amazing scholar and an amazing dude, but also because on this topic, he really did kind of begin the discourse. And so for that, I'm really grateful, and I've asked him to kind of say a few words as well. So turn it over to Ryan.
Well, thanks. Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks. Well, I'm going to keep this very short, but great to see so many familiar faces here. This is just one of my favorite conferences of the year, and it's something I haven't missed and I wouldn't miss. And as we were setting up the Tech Policy Lab, which I'll say a couple words about in case you're not familiar, one of the models, of course, was Silicon Flatirons, because if you think of just how incredibly effective this organization is at generating research and scholarship, at convening people together around the right ideas, it is just a model for tech policy at law schools and elsewhere across the country. And of course, you know that. But I just continue to marvel at how well things are done here, and I look to it as a model as I try to build institutions at University of Washington. So the Tech Policy Lab, simply stated, is aimed at enhancing tech policy, getting better tech policy. I think one of the ways that it means to occupy a new space is that we are really thoroughly interdisciplinary. And so there are three directors, faculty directors. I'm in the law school, and then one of them is in computer science and engineering, Tadayoshi Kono, who's a security expert. Yoshi did things like, he was the guy who with part of a team, hacked into those embedded medical devices that led Dick Cheney to turn his off wireless, or hacked into smart cars to lead to changes in the way that manufacturers create security in cars. So really interesting guy. And then in the School of Information, Batya Friedman, who is one of the pioneers of a concept of value-sensitive design. And so the three of us are all at University of Washington. We got together and put together this interdisciplinary collaboration with the idea that there are just very few contemporary problems left to solve by reference to any one discipline. Right? It just strikes, I think it strikes all of you in this room. It would be sort of strange to say that you could ever solve a contemporary, difficult, complex problem by reference to just one discipline. And I think we see that reflected here in the interdisciplinary nature of this conference in tackling this very interesting and difficult problem. So, I mean, Paul, as usual, is being unduly generous. In fact, he's been very generous with me in allowing us to bring our voice into this conversation, to do a modest sponsorship of the event. It's a tremendous opportunity, and I really look forward to today. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Ryan. So I'm about to launch into the first panel, but I did want to also close by thanking a few people. I always feel like thanking at the end of the day is just anticlimactic and besides the point. So let's thank these people at the start of the day. First and foremost, Coben Keegan is the symposium editor this year, which means he put in dozens and dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of hours, wrangling people, finding rides from the airport, and he'll continue to work with the authors. Coben, is he in the room right now? See, he's doing something, right? So if you see a man wearing the name Coben Keegan, name tag letter, please thank him for the hard work. Silicon Flatirons is also so blessed to have Anna, Jamie, and Cactus, our permanent staff, who do such an amazing job planning these conferences and running them off without a hitch. So please join me in thanking the three of them. And last but not least, and I'm sorry I don't have a full list, but you may know if you look at the calendar that final exams begin Monday. And despite that fact, there are a whole host of students that you're going to see taking photos, passing microphones around, giving you name tags at the front desk. And it speaks to the kind of dedication and excitement these students have about Silicon Flatirons. The only tiny request we ask of you is give them all jobs, please, by the end of the day, or at least start conversations that may lead in that direction. So thank the student volunteers and the other students who attend as well. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to the moderator for the first panel, this guy named Paul O. Thank you. Okay, so before we... Yeah, for those of you who were here last year, this is where I introduced our surprise guest speaker, because the President of the United States was giving a speech about the topic of the conference, not because of our conference. And so we did a viewing party. No viewing party this year. We're going to be much more conventional this year. So let me just, I know I've spoken a lot already, and I hate doing that, but let me just spend 2 minutes framing the panels for today, right? And so the kind of point here is the changing nature of science and research as it is presented in the title of the conference. And specifically, it's about the kind of rise of companies, for-profit entities, studying, researching, you pick the right verb that works for you, their customer base or their prospective customer base. And the question is, when, if ever, do they cross ethical lines? How would we know? And should we do anything about it? And then along the way, there are also lots of interesting questions about what this means for academic research. And so just to kind of frame the 4 panels, the first panel is really going to set the table. We're going to talk about the phenomenon. We're going to try and organize and give you taxonomies if anyone wants to try and do that. The second panel is really going to look at this public-private divide, what it means to be a researcher of human behavior in the 21st century, and what it means to do that for the Ivory Tower, and what it means to do that for Silicon Valley. The third is going to really dig deeply into human subjects research and the ethics of it, and whether or not we know something is good or bad or why, whether something is for profit or for research or for knowledge. And then finally, the fourth panel, which is the panel with all the lawyers, we'll talk about institutions we might develop, build, improve that would help us police these ethical lines. And then along the way, we really are delighted, as we have for many years, to welcome Julie Brill, Commissioner of the FTC, who's going to sit up here with another moderator, Paul Ohm, and we're going to have a conversation not only about the topic for today, but I can't also resist asking her questions about the state of the FTC generally. Okay, so that's my long wind-up. Once again, the whole point of this conference, unlike some of ours, is to let the presenters present their papers first. But because we're a conference that really prides ourselves on the discussions we have, I've only given them 10 minutes each, and I've asked this student here to have the evil little red light appear when the 10 minutes are up. And I've asked Tal to go first. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Tal. Thank you. Oh, wait, one more thing. The other tradition here is we don't do lengthy introductions on our panels, but let me at least say something about a sentence about each one. Zeynep Tufekci is an assistant professor at UNC. Tal Yarkoni is an assistant professor at the University of Texas. Both of them wrote these amazing and provocative blog posts that I was talking about. Matthew Boeckman is the vice president at a company called Craftsy, a local startup. Kashmir Hill, for 2 days, has been senior editor at Fusion, and Rob Sherman is the deputy chief privacy officer at Facebook. But please, I commend their full biographies to you in the agenda. Okay, turning over to you, Tom. Thanks.
Thanks. It's really nice to be here. So the question posed in the first panel is, should we care that companies are studying their customers and the ways that they're doing it? And I'm actually not going to give you an answer to the question. What I hope to do is maybe provide a little bit of background about what has happened until now, and also suggest some things that probably need to be true if you want to say you do care. Right? So there are certain ways in which you need to be consistent, and so I'm going to try to lay out some conditions that you might want to consider. So the first thing I want to do is just kind of address the question: is this new? Is there anything qualitatively different about what has happened in the last year or two? We've heard a lot about Facebook study, OkCupid study, and others. And I think the answer, at least in terms of qualitative differences, is no. There's really, I spent some time thinking about, is there any feature you could point to that is new and hasn't been done before? And I couldn't think of any, right? So there's lots of cases you can point to going back decades where almost anything you point to has been done. And a nice example of this, I think, is in grocery stores. So in preparation for this, I started looking through the literature on what grocery stores have been doing and how they've been studying their customers and manipulating their customers, really. And it's quite incredible. There's this enormous published literature, and it really kind of surprised me how many ways, as soon as you step into a supermarket, your behavior is being funneled in ways that you may not be aware of. So everything from the items are put at a certain eye level on the shelves to the arrangement of the departments. Of course, they put the impulse purchases by the checkout counter. They manipulate the music. Now they can send you customized, not vouchers, coupons to get you to the store. And this has been going on for a long, long time. In fact, you can go back 60 years and find papers talking about how the increment in money spent unintentionally per meter traveled in the store. Right? So people have been doing this for a long time, and it's not, of course, just grocery stores. Banks have been doing this for decades. Capital One is famous for studying every program they implement begins with an evaluation of, do people respond better to the blue envelope or the white envelope? Certainly, fast food chains will do this. Airlines will do this. There probably is no domain in which large corporations for decades have not been, at least the good ones or the ones who are more effective in their business, have not been doing this for a long time. And I think you can make a reasonable case that you probably won't survive, or at least you're much less likely to survive in the marketplace if you're not doing extensive A/B testing, predictive modeling, and so on. Now, this is not to say there's no difference, right? I don't think there's any qualitative difference you can point to. one other thing I should mention is, it's also not the case that there are certain kinds of information that the companies haven't had. Right? Credit card companies for decades also have had access to everything you buy, and so there's a lot of information that a lot of people have had on you for a long time. And what's I think you could argue is different now is the scale. So it's become much easier to run massive randomized controlled experiments online and to share this information with other people. And so I think I'm not suggesting that there's no difference. 50 years ago, everything was exactly the same. What we're saying is that the difference is in the scale, but I at least can't think of anything qualitatively different that has changed. And so we need to be aware of that, because what I don't think we should be saying is like, oh, there's some revolutionary development here, and now we need to actually worry about this, right? There have been many opportunities to express concern, and people have expressed concern about many of these same issues for a long time. Okay. The second kind of what I want to talk about is so again, I don't want to answer the question, should you care? I think that's something that depends on your values and and such. But I do think there are sort of, if you want to be internally consistent, there are things you have to agree or sort of mentally endorse in order to be able to say with a straight face that I actually care about what's going on right now. And the first one kind of follows from what I just kind of talked about, which is this is everywhere, right? So what you can't say, I think, is I don't think it's fair to say, well, I'm really unhappy that Facebook is using my information in this way, but I have no problem walking into a grocery store where my behavior is being manipulated in all kinds of ways, and I'm probably going to end up spending more money than I want, right? So you have to take a global view, I think, and say, what is the general concern here? Is it that my behavior is being manipulated? Well, then that happens all the time, right? And I should worry about almost everything I do. Is it that my data is being used or being sold to other people? Again, that happens all the time. So, and again, I'm not saying you shouldn't care. I'm just saying that you can't sort of pick one, you can't cherry pick one study you heard about or one kind of thing that came up and say, well, that's bad. Let's fix that little thing, and then everything will go back to being okay, right? These are global issues. The second concern is there is a trade-off here, right? So I think there clearly is a cost in terms of service. So, for example, nobody likes to call up, tech support or a credit card company and sit on the line for 20 minutes. Well, a lot of companies are now implementing new sort of predictive models that will try to figure out what it is you want. What are you calling about before you even dial the number, and funnel you to that department so that maybe you don't spend 10 minutes sitting on the line. Which means that if you want to restrict or constrain or inhibit people from doing this kind of work, there is potentially a cost to be paid in terms of the service. And again, I'm not saying it's not worth it, but I'm saying that I think it would be naive to think that you could get away with, you could do away with all this kind of stuff, and all that would happen is companies would make a little bit less money, but your user experience would be the same, right? A lot of the things we really take for granted and we like the user experience on Facebook or when you enter a store, the lighting, how easy it is to navigate the aisles, a lot of that stuff comes directly out of modeling your behavior and doing controlled experiments. And so, yeah, not to say that we shouldn't impose restrictions or regulations on this kind of stuff, but there is a cost to be paid potentially. Third thing I'll say is, one thing I found particularly interesting, so for those of you who I think probably everyone is aware of the Facebook study, but Facebook published a study with the short of it really demonstrating that by sort of altering, specifically by cutting some of the emotional content in your feed, you could influence people's emotions in positive or negative direction. Now the effect was very small. In fact, you could argue that it actually didn't work in some sense, but let's set aside the details and focus on the general question. Like, is it an egregious offense that companies are now, not just figuring out how to sell you more products and get you to buy things, but they're actually studying you and trying to manipulate your emotions? And the thing that I find interesting is, if you are serious about the idea that, what you care about is the potential harm to people, right, then I would argue actually you should be encouraging companies to do more of this research, not less, right? Because a casino can easily get away with saying, well, we don't care about what people feel. That's not our province. We're just trying to get them to stay in the casino longer and spend more time. But it'd be very naive to think that there's any way that can happen except by manipulating people's emotions, right? And nobody who works for a casino could possibly believe that there's no impact on people's hedonic experience, right? And so if you care about that, you should encourage people to study it, I would think, right? So how would you know whether a particular manipulation actually impacts people negatively or positively? How would you know if harm is being caused if you didn't actually allow the companies and even encourage or potentially even mandate that they actually figure out what is going on, right? Setting aside the question of how much are you selling, how much revenue is coming in, what is happening to people when you do this? And if you turn a blind eye to that, then I think it's hard to say that your primary concern is the harm, right? Because you don't know intuitively what's harmful and what's not. People will disagree over that. By studying it, you can get a sense of that. And the last thing I'll mention, which I think will come up probably in the fourth panel, is, and of course, and this is not my domain of expertise at all, but of course there are probably going to be all kinds of practical implications and unintended consequences, right? So if you start to think about, well, how would you actually introduce any kind of regulation or institutions that would oversee these kinds of issues? it can get hairy very quickly. So Gary gave the example already of, we tend to focus on what happens online. But I have never actually heard anyone suggest that when you walk into Target, there should be someone at the door giving you a sheet of information saying, just so you know, today we're running this experiment and you will be randomly assigned to one of these conditions, right? And that has never happened probably to anyone in this room in our lifetimes, right? Even though the concerns in some sense are kind of similar, not exactly the same. These are stores that have a lot of information about you. They are manipulating your behavior as soon as you walk in the door. And you could even argue it's actually easier and more practical to give someone a sheet at the door because you're not navigating to a different website every 2 seconds, right? You're already there. You're going to spend half an hour in the store. So there are kind of practical implications that I think need to be fleshed out. And it's not going to be as simple as, well, here, let's just introduce this regulation. But that's, what that looks like is really not my domain. And I think probably you'll hear a lot more about that. So I think I'm actually short on time. Is there anything that maybe anyone on the panel wants me to discuss?
No, we'll get to questions later. You will be rewarded greatly for the extra minute and 45 seconds. So turn it over to Zeynep next.
Okay, so this is great because you made half my argument, but I'm going to start disagreeing. So does everyone do this? Yes. A lot of companies do this. So that's definitely true. Was the Facebook experiment a big deal? To be honest, besides the issues it raised, it was a small effect. I mean, I did a lot of interviews, and half the time I was discussing why the issue was important. Half the time I was saying, no, it's a small effect, and it wasn't a major tweak. So on that, we agree. Now, here's where we start disagreeing, and very badly. The fact that everyone does it is not an excuse for anything. So, I mean, everyone used to have lead paint in their walls. That's not a good argument. The fact that it's not qualitatively different is not true because we didn't used to do everything online. There were physical, Target cannot physically alter everything like this and change our interaction with our friends and family and our financial interactions in an environment of complete information asymmetry without us even noticing it. If Target had decided to do something unethical, and see if using, I don't know, let's think of something unethical, very barely legal teens in barely dressed clothes as their cashiers to see if that would work, I would notice. When I'm experimented online, I don't notice. There's a lot of things that are different in the physical world. We have just moved into a world where everything we do more and more leaves an imprint. That simply was not true in the offline world. They would try to study and figure you out. Were you a Republican or Democrat? And they would see if you, have a magazine subscription to, I don't know if there's something like that, Gun Owners Weekly or something, and figure something out. Those are very crude measures. Right now, there are thousands of measures about you being collected as you go about your everyday life. The shift from offline interaction to being mediated online on private spaces is a huge difference on the amount of data that these companies have on you unilaterally and also governments have on you unilaterally. I don't want to single Facebook out. Facebook is particularly powerful. It's got 1.3 billion users for a reason. It mediates our interactions with friends and family. And if you're an immigrant or a college student, it's essential. I can't do without it. But yes, it's not just Facebook. I mean, I'm not singling them out. So there is a qualitative difference. Even more, this data can tell things about you that you kept private before. By experimenting on people and by modeling them, we know studies. If we've got a Facebook person, again, I'm not singling out Facebook, but Facebook is powerful, you can model pretty accurately a person's gender, race, sexual orientation, potential drug use, their personality traits in psychological scales, plus their social network information, plus Facebook's just changing its terms of service to all of its locations, plus what other things people say about you. There's never been a time in history that much of data was either generated about you or could be used to computationally model things about you that I did not know. Now, when I look at a person, I have certain impressions, but imagine being able to also pull their psychological profile and also being able to privately target them without anybody else seeing in a way that tweaks that psychological profile's vulnerabilities just right. A little while back, Ad Weekly had this article on how women who feel fat, ugly, or depressed are more likely to buy makeup, and how when they feel depressed, they're more likely to buy makeup. We have research that shows we can tell when people are depressed. Why not target them? We have research that shows that we can make them feel a little more depressed. Why not tweak that? I mean, I find the idea that this kind of thing is just business as usual kind of absurd, because there's never been such power with this depth of data, plus modeling, which reveals data about you that you do not reveal yourself. I don't agree that there's no alternatives. The idea that we have all this customer service because this is the only way it can work is not technologically sound. There's a lot of ways you can also provide this data by including safeguards in it. You know, you can, there is, Ed Felton's on a later panel, there's tons of ways of using cryptographic methods that allow people to use data to present services to you without this level of keeping it in your name. There have been experiments, there's like DigiCash, goes 20 years back, to try to give us some of the conveniences of online selection and online customization without the accompanying weaknesses to our privacy. They're not pursued because these companies are not in the business of pursuing user protections. They are in the business of collecting as much data about you as possible, and I encourage you to try to read Facebook's new terms of service. It's expensive. They want to collect data on everything they possibly can, and that's the business model. Now, I understand why that's the business model, and they're certainly not alone in this business model, but there are ways that they could do a big chunk of what they do with a little less power on their side. And we'd still be fine, and I think they'd still make a lot of money. So I think the idea that there's no alternatives, it's not technologically correct. The idea that we should study this, I completely agree. So when Facebook, for example, published results that shows that it can influence, by slight experiments, it can influence vote turnout. In 2010, Facebook researchers tweaked the Go Vote message like slightly from a social to an informational, and they calculated they turned out about 340,000 people. That is 60,000 less than the difference between Romney and Obama in the right-swing states. They basically published the fact that Facebook can throw a close election, let alone a Florida election, right? This is real power, and I think they're to be commended they published this. That's the responsible thing to do. And I think they did their experiment in a responsible way. I have a lot of friends at Facebook Data Science. If they ran the world, I'd probably be okay, but that's not how it's going to potentially work in the future. They did it responsibly. They did it randomly. They try to make sure not to do things. And I think the fact that Facebook has been publishing this research is to be commended. So I don't want to be piling just on them because they're the ones publishing it. I want to encourage them to publish more. But to realize that by publishing more, the result is not we published, we're done. The result is we published this, and this is a great insight into the kind of power these companies have. And I realize people will have their PR hats on and say, we got this under control. But I want to say, we are all in over our heads. This is a brave new world. I have friends at YouTube that I've known for a long time, and now we're trying to figure out whether to take down beheading videos in a civil war. It's like the stuff that we're facing, the power these companies have is not a minor power. And I know their PR faces to say, we've got this under control, but I want to say nobody has this under control. We have stepped into this enormous new infrastructure where the data collected about you is now being used in decisions that do not have right answers. This is not like automation before. This is not like flying a plane, which raises issues, pilot skills, what do you do? What does the co-pilot do? The joke goes, the future co-pilot is going to be a dog and is going to bite the pilot if he tries to or she tries to touch the controls, right? So automation has that kind of implications for pilot skills. But there's a right answer. Are we safer flying? Increasingly. So we have a judging yardstick. Increasingly, this data is being used to sell things to you. It will be used for your health purposes. It will be used for hiring you. It already is being used to hire you or not. It's being used as your Facebook sort of profile is what the first impression a lot of people have about you. So the algorithm really matters. When Ferguson news broke out, Facebook's algorithm basically blocked out in my feed Ferguson news. So that had an influence. there's all these consequences to this power. So when we try to study and understand this, the responsibility, I think, of these companies is to realize that they may be responsible right now. They're not always going to be in power. These companies have huge founder effects. Right now, there are a few people who have a lot of sway. It's not always going to be like that. They're setting the information infrastructure for maybe decades, so this is very important. And the fact that this data is being used in questions where there's no right answer, are you hireable? Is this piece of news relevant? Is this important? Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? These are really deep philosophical questions we're now turning over to data and algorithms in an information asymmetry environment where I have no idea what data they have on me. I think says that we really need both oversight, internal, external, and the companies and everybody has to get together and say, how do we responsibly go forward when a few information and data brokers and collectors can now throw elections, potentially, change our news, change our attention, change our hiring, firing, dating, healthcare. This is enormous power. This is, in some ways, perhaps wonderful and amazing, and I'm amazed. But it is not inconsequential. It is not unavoidable. And it is certainly not the way just things have been. This, this is a major difference, both qualitatively and quantitatively, and also it is a shift in power in many dimensions. So that's where I will end with just almost with
you used 37 seconds of Tal's time. So.
This is what data is bad for, see?
That's right, exactly. I've been A/B testing you this morning. So, so the responsible moderator thing to do now would be to hand it back to Tal, and we'd have it back and forth, and then no one else would get to speak. So I'm not going to do the responsible thing, but I am going to give Tal lots of opportunities in follow-up questions. The tradition here, as I've said, is always to focus on the kind of discourse and back and forth. And that includes you, so the audience will have kind of the last 15 or 20 minutes to ask questions, so ready your questions. And there is a hashtag, hashtag #flatirons. My apologies to people who want to talk about straightening their hair for the next 8 hours. We're going to hijack, because this happens every year. There's always one confused person who says, what are you guys talking about? And I have it open right here. So I will take questions from Twitter as well if you want to ask them that way. And so, just briefly, I know that everyone in this room paid attention to the emotional contagion study, but because I didn't ask either of the presenters to just give the basics, I'll give you like a 2-minute summary, and I'll probably screw up all the details, but there are people in the room with an incentive to correct the details. So in June 2014, in the respected science journal PNAS, there was a science article with a pretty kind of outlandish title about emotional contagion in massive social networks. And what was revealed in the paper was that for 1 week, I think it was January 2013, Facebook selected 600,000 users at random and then divided them into different groups, control groups and treatment groups. And for some of the people, they tweaked their algorithm that decides which social network status updates you see, so that if they detected something that had what was a marker of a happy word, you were less likely to see it. And then for the other group, another group, it was if there was a sad word, you were less likely to see it. And then the control was you just got whatever their ordinary vanilla algorithm would produce. And the thing they were trying to decide is whether seeing fewer happy or fewer sad things from your friends made you correspondingly happier or sadder. And what they revealed in this one chart, and again, as academics often do, they kind of use a lot of big language to talk about what an amazing effect they saw. They talked about how seeing fewer happy status updates makes you sadder, seeing fewer sad status updates makes you happier, and the way they knew that was because they measured the happiness or sadness in your posts around the same time. Okay, so that in a nutshell is what they did, and Tal has already put on the table that maybe they really didn't actually show much because there were very, very, very tiny effects shown on the y-axis of the chart in question. Okay, so that's setting the table, and then I'll spend 30 seconds talking about OkCupid, the dating site, which in the wake of all of the hubbub wrote this strange blog post that says, surprise, we do research on our users too, and it talked about 3 studies from OkCupid, which is famous for releasing awesome infographics about dating preferences based on studying its users. And the thing that I think garnered the most news attention was, I think it was the founder of OkCupid who wrote this blog post, made the very bad choice of including a snarky photo from the 1950s of a kid putting electrodes into a potato, right? So talk about setting the scene for kind of responsible corporate responsibility. This is how they kind of analogized the research they were doing on their customers. Okay, that's table setting.
He wrote a whole book on it.
And then he wrote a whole book on it, yeah. And some of the research results were pretty amazing, but if people want to talk about those. And then let's not forget Target and their pregnancy prediction, which probably fits in this bucket as well. I want to dive pretty quickly into the big question, which is there something qualitatively or quantitatively new here that both speakers really teed up? But I think we have one ground-clearing question, and I'm going to start with you, Matthew. One thing I love is all three of our discussants work for organizations that really depend on understanding their customers, right, or their readers. And so I'm going to start with Matthew, because what I really want to put on the table first is scale, right? So how many online companies are undertaking something we might call customer research? And then along the way, is there definitional things we need to figure out? Like, what are we calling customer research? Are there taxonomies of types of customer research? And maybe, if you want, share some of what you guys do at Craftsy.
Yeah, so the short answer is everyone's doing this. There's a lot of technologies that enable you to surf the internet anonymously and to exempt yourself from this kind of research. That's not very hard to figure out. But everyone's doing this, and the reality is the market is going to determine success or failure of a company by how well you're able to position a product for your users, and whether it's a product from a revenue standpoint or a product from a community building standpoint where you're essentially selling relationships, your effectiveness of that is going to be contingent on your ability to understand your users and therefore gathering this data and analyzing it. I think the big difference, not to go total nerd on everyone here for a second, is that we have a new technology that has come to the forefront in the last couple of years called big data analysis. Every good engineer rolls their eyes when they hear those two words, but the reality is that the volume of data we gather has always been there, but we haven't had the tools to actually analyze it in meaningful ways and to apply rigorous statistical techniques. Just in the last 3 or 4 years, big data tools have become common. There's been a skill set and an entire technical discipline built up around how we get literally terabytes of data and go through it and understand and draw conclusions in like seconds instead of years. So I think it does change very much both the quantitative, maybe not so much the quantitative, but the quality of what you're able to get from the information you gather is different today. At Craftsy, I feel good on this panel because what we do is we offer an educational experience for people who are passionate about knitting and quilting and sewing. So the information that we gather on our users helps us better understand the way that they're going to engage with our products, which are basically classes teaching them how to knit booties, but also how they are going to engage with other members of their community. We came to this business without actually knowing anything about sewing. But through our research, we're able to quickly learn that quilters are frequently sewists, but are infrequently knitters. Knitters are never crocheters. Crocheters sometimes sew. And what that means, by the way, there's no book I could read that would help me understand that. I can't learn that from doing user surveys, but by showing different sections of our membership, different pictures that they're going to click on, different user projects or different courses, I can understand the nuance of their behavior in ways that are, I think, very altruistic and help us create a better experience for them. And certainly it helps us selfishly create a better revenue experience for our organization. But when you go to a website or you go to a store or you interact with a friend, you're there for a meaningful interaction. And if your friend is only talking about things that you're not interested in, you don't spend much time talking to them anymore. But if you're here at my website to learn about quilting and I'm showing you nothing but knitting pictures, we're not going to long remain friends. And so I think it's important to understand that there's revenue components to these bits of research, but more importantly, I think it's about, at least for us, very much meaningful engagement with our users.
So thank you, and I just learned the word sewist.
Oh, yes, we never say sewer because sewer sounds like sewer, so sewist.
So is it like sower, sewist? Okay, so Kashmir, again, I'm going to ask the panelists to refrain for 10 more seconds talking about whether this is really, really new. And I want you to reflect if you have opinions on kind of in your industry or other industries you've been writing about, kind of what this research means and what it looks like in the taxonomy. I know that you just left a company that I think has for like 4 years been doing a study on if I show a quote to people when they'd rather read an article, will they rage quit and break their monitor? Because for me, that's all Forbes really is. But I want to hear more about your thoughts on this question.
I'm so glad to never have to hear that complaint. Yeah, I mean, I think journalism organizations that were probably a little bit behind in terms of really gathering this data and studying our readers, our customers. Basically what we've done for a very long time is play around with headlines. So Gawker and Huffington Post really pioneered this. Try a headline, try a different headline, try a different headline, figure out what gets people to click, and then you keep that headline, which is pretty basic. Most news organizations now use a tool called Chartbeat, which tells us a lot about our readers in real time. How long they stay on an article, where they're coming from, how far down they go. But I don't think we're quite there in harnessing the big data away a lot of the companies that I talk to and write about do. So we are probably not as quite as far along as other people. What I have found really interesting in the companies I'm covering and just what kind of news is appealing to people right now is just like how data is gathered and then how companies are going to use it. And the Facebook stuff really catalyzed a discussion about this, but there have been so many other examples. Uber has gotten a lot of attention in the last couple months around privacy issues, and I think most people when they were taking Ubers weren't thinking about the company is going to use this to study them in some way. Yet Uber did this data collection where they were looking at people who took Uber on a Friday or Saturday night, went to a bar, and then the next morning got picked up from a location near the bar that was not their home, and presented this data on a page called Rides of Glory. And it was about the towns where people were having the most one-night stands. And you just wouldn't expect that when you're using Uber, that is the kind of data analysis that they would do. And so I'm just seeing this over and over again. Not just this question around manipulation, but the question around how these companies are going to gather data about you and then use it for marketing purposes. And they can have very sensitive information. Jawbone did something similar after the San Francisco earthquake. They gave us this fun little chart showing like how people scrambled out of bed after the earthquake happened and people's movements. And again, I don't think that people who are wearing a jawbone around their wrist, collecting a lot of data about them all the time, are thinking about the fact that the company is then going to collect that data and use it in marketing materials. So there's a lot of questions, I think, for people about what companies are allowed to do with their data, what they're signing up for. And this data is going to get more and more sensitive, and more of it will be created because we're buying more and more devices that are internet connected. So those are the big things I'm thinking about and writing about on top of the questions about actual studies of users and how to manipulate.
So this is, thank you, Kashmir. So this is Rob Sherman's third, I think, consecutive appearance on one of these panels. And I really do respect the fact that you came and you knew that some of the discussion would be about your company. I hope not all the discussion is about your company. A big difference from some companies that never, ever come to academic events like this, and I'm talking to you, Apple, so send someone, damn it. But at any rate, so Rob, same question, and I think it gets complicated with social networking services, which have particular characteristics, so if you want to talk about that. But I also, just if you want to correct the record on anything anyone said to date or so far that might be inaccurate.
Sure. So I mean, I have a lot of reactions to what I've heard the other panelists say, and I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to explore all that. So I won't dive into all of that now. I mean, I think at a high level, one of the assumptions I was thinking about as we were preparing for this panel, that I think is sort of inherent in a lot of the reaction to research generally that companies do, is this assumption that companies are always right, that companies know what the right thing is to do, that a company like Facebook inherently knows, like, this is what a social network should look like, this is how we're going to build it, and we build the perfect social network, and we're kind of done. And I think as most people would realize, if you think about it, that's not the way it works. We have a lot of engineers and product people who have a lot of good ideas for how we can improve. But at the end of the day, we don't know for sure that what we're doing is the thing that people want us to do. And so we have to look at, in the same way that Forbes or Fusion would look at the way that the articles that people are interested in reading or not, it's important for us to look at feedback from the people that we're serving. I mean, I think I'd argue that there are not any or at least many successful companies that blind themselves to external feedback and just take no effort to understand how people are using their products. And Matthew, you alluded to this a little bit too. I mean, there's a really strong business imperative for that. I mean, as we see the explosion of, in my sector and for our company at least, as we see the explosion of smartphones, and we see that, you know, in my pocket, I can get free access to content from lots of different places around the world. That's a challenge for us. And so one of the things that we want to, you know, it means that people will use Facebook if we can get them the information that they're interested in quickly and effectively. And if we can't, then we won't. And so then they won't. And so it's really important for us, and I think we have a responsibility to be responsive to the people that we're serving. That said, you know, there's also a lot of trust that people place in us, and by sharing your data with Facebook, by using Facebook to communicate with people, people have an expectation that we're going to be good stewards of their data. And so I think, you know, there are a lot of things, Zeynep, that you mentioned that I will not surprise you that I disagree with. One of the things that you said that I think will surprise you that I disagree with is sort of the idea that, like, this is all taken care of and we're good and we should all go home. I mean, one of the reasons why I'm here, but why I think this is a really important discussion is, you know, one of the things that we learned coming out of the reaction to the emotional contagion study, which I'm sure we'll talk more about, is, you know, there's not agreement. You know, I think there was a lot of reaction to it, but there's not agreement on what the right solution is, and there's not agreement on, you know, this is what's okay and not okay. And so I think it's really, I mean, I think we owe it to our users to have that discussion, to be really thoughtful internally, and I think we've tried to do a lot of that work already, and we can talk about that too. But I think it's a really important thing to continue to do. But to go back to the original question, I mean, this is something I think we'd be irresponsible if we didn't do the work to try to understand what people want us to do, and I think we're not unique in that way.
Great. So, Zeynep, in a second, I'll bring you back into this, but Tal, so you've been challenged several times, and you two really did do a nice job raising different kind of components to the is it different question, right? And so Zeynep says it's kind of online, and it's about the inference and the psychological profiling, the individual targeting, the fact that there's so much data, the pervasiveness. And so the question back to you is, are you compelled about this? And of course, at the end of the day, we're really having a battle of analogies. But I just want to give you an opportunity to kind of reflect on your responses to this.
You know, I do think that on some level, it can wind up being a question of, like, what do you mean by qualitative versus quantitative, right? I mean, I certainly would not deny that you can do things now that you couldn't do 40 years ago. So, for example, you know, you couldn't send customized coupons 40 years ago, I think, right? Because you wouldn't have the turnaround time where you get that data and maybe, like, you know, a week later, you know that someone bought this thing last week, so now we can send them something customized. So, you know, in that sense, can you do things you couldn't? Yes. So if that makes it qualitatively different, then fine. But I think, I guess, from what I see as an ethical standpoint, I don't see any concern I would have about the way my data is being used that I couldn't have had, you know, 20 years ago. But now, having said that, I also want to correct something else, which is I did not suggest that it's okay, but, you know, don't need to worry about this because everyone's doing it, right? I thought it was very clear that I'm not saying, well, everyone's doing this, so you shouldn't care. What I'm saying is you can't focus in on any one of these examples and pretend that that's a local problem you can solve easily, because it's going on all over. So this could, you know, so if you are not aware that everyone does this, now you have more reason to be concerned, right? And that's totally fine with me. So if you did not know that grocery stores and, you know, bank companies and credit card companies manipulate your behavior, but you were worried about what Facebook did, then you should probably worry even more now, right? But I have talked to many people who you know, did not realize that and then thought about it and said, well, you know, I guess we've been doing this for 50 years. Nothing bad has happened to me, so I'm not concerned. And that's fine, right? That's a value judgment that you can make. So to me, the really important question is, and it's one that I think has to be answered on a case-by-case basis for you know, people have to answer themselves, is, you know, essentially, how much value do you place on what you get back versus what you give up, and how, you know, what is your estimation of the risks involved too, which is something that's very hard to answer for anyone, right?
So I'm going to push you for a second because you started your answer by saying, yeah, maybe some things have changed, and you kind of ended your answers by saying, and lots of consumers kind of didn't know about this. But in the middle of that sandwich, you had one sentence where you said, I don't really care about what we've learned and has been revealed. There's like a ton of normative framework around why you personally, or maybe you think we collectively shouldn't care. Like, and you ended by saying maybe it's a cost-benefit thing. maybe it's sure there are some risks, but hey, free Facebook, right? So can you unpack why you don't care? Or
oh, no, I wasn't saying that I personally don't care. I actually have mixed feelings, but I really don't have a strong position. I can sort of see both ways. Yeah. I'm saying that I think I've talked to people who that is their, and in fact, I think I'd say people 20 and under generally, that I think is the attitude. It's like, that's been my experience at least. I mean, there certainly are people who do not care, right? I think that's hard to deny, and and it is clear, I think, from my perspective, that you are getting something for the data you give up, right? So, nobody is forcing you to use any of these services individually. Now, certainly it's true you cannot avoid this en masse, or you cannot stay at home, lock yourself up. So there is a general issue there that I think we should concern ourselves with. But you could say, I'm not going to use Facebook because I'm not happy with the way they use my data. And the reality is, even after, so I don't know if Facebook is willing to give out this information, but I suspect that probably not that many people stopped using Facebook in the aftermath of the emotion contagion study, right? Because my guess is what happens very often with these kind of things is people get upset and they think about it and they realize the cost of them is actually higher than. So again, that is, you can look at it and say, well, that's ridiculous. If you have beliefs about, these are the values you care for, then you shouldn't be willing to compromise them as soon as it gets a little difficult. But if we're being pragmatic, the reality is people do make these decisions all the time, and it's not, I don't think it's fair for me to say, well, because you're okay giving up that information, there's something wrong with you. So, I think that's a decision that it's perfectly legitimate for someone to say, I do not want, I like Facebook a lot. I accept that they use this information this way. And some other company may use information I don't like, and I'm not going to use that service. I don't see any sort of deep problem with that, right? If people are willing to make that trade.
So Zeynep, both Rob and Tal have kind of put on the table a few things.
Right. So let me just start by, if there was nothing new, Facebook wouldn't have, what's your network market capitalization? 200 billion, something? It wouldn't be $200 billion in 10 years if there was nothing new. I just disagree greatly. We are creating the new infrastructure of the 21st century, and it's just beginning. The Internet of Things is coming. There's going to be sensors everywhere. Facial recognition is here. You are being turned into information and data in ways that just was not even dreamable. If it were nothing here, we wouldn't have all this money going somewhere. Now, the Uber thing is interesting because they basically published a post saying, in 6 big cities, we know if you're having one-night stands, dear politicians and everybody else. There is real power here. And it's not just Uber. It's everybody who has your location data. Everybody who has your location data potentially knows, not that hard, whether if you're female, if you've been to Planned Parenthood, have you considered an abortion? They know whether you're having an affair. They know if you spend certain nights away from home regularly. This is not hard to figure out. This is an enormous amount of power. And Uber deleting its blog post and going dark about this topic does not make the power any less powerful. And Facebook now wants to track location better. I understand why it's commercially interesting, but it's not just Facebook. A zillion apps on your phone are collecting this information. So the power and information asymmetry is there. If you don't like it, you don't use it, does not work when there's no real competition in market due to network effects. Once again, that is why Google and Facebook are worth that much. If you are in college, if you're an immigrant, there are countries where you don't have an internet outside Facebook for all practical purposes because all your social network is there. And Middle East, Egypt, if you're not on Facebook, you can't do politics. These are great things, right? I mean, half my research is look what Facebook has done in authoritarian states, So it's not like I recognize their power. And I think Facebook recognizes their power. I don't think they're saying, oh, we're nothing. I mean, I don't think they agree with Tal. I think they know exactly how powerful and valuable they are.
I'm not saying that.
That they're not without much alternative. If you're in college and if you want to volunteer for the choir, it's on Facebook. PRI, I did an interview where they're going to put their interview Q&A. It's on Facebook. This is when you have network effects. I can give you a brilliant new phone that you can't call anybody with. You're not going to buy it, right? Facebook is the de facto yellow pages, white pages, and social interaction for a large number of people in many countries, including many age groups. And there is not a viable alternative because of that. The internet tends to throw, even though it's very open, it's not flat, it tends to throw up hierarchies and sort of these quasi-monopolistic things very quickly. eBay, If you're going to sell something, you're going to go where the buyers are, right? I mean, Amazon is moving into that space. You can argue Google is obviously there. You can make a case Twitter is nudging itself along that way. I mean, this is not just one company's thing, but where you have network effects, where the number of people are what determines the value. And once again, I think that also makes a moral case. Facebook is co-created by its users who put in their labor and their social networks there. I mean, I think you have a duty to your users beyond the widget company that's just producing shoes or something. They're trusting you with their social networks, and that's why they can't go elsewhere. They don't have a viable choice. If there were 10 potential Facebooks, and I think it's structurally very hard, then I would have less of a case. Then we could compare privacy policies. This is like saying, if you want to call somebody on the phone, in the middle of the conversation, your phone company should be able to switch what the person just said, replace it with a sentence they put 2 weeks ago that was slightly less positive, not tell you they just did that. You think you're just having the conversation. If you don't like it, don't call your friends on the phone. This is not a reasonable thing. Now, I could have told the Facebook researchers, they said they were surprised by the reaction. I could have told them not to be surprised because part of my research is how important these platforms are to people, how central they are to their lives. I mean, the tweak was small, but Jeff Hancock, the lead researcher on the manipulation study, he got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of very, very angry emails, people saying, how dare you touch my Facebook feed? Because it is not a place where they're going and buying cornflakes versus mornflakes. It's where they're talking with their social networks. They're talking with their grandmothers, they're talking with their cousins, their friends, their lovers. So these are very important. 62% of people in a recent study who were undergrads, because, you know, we don't have Facebook to experiment on. We experiment on undergrads. They had no idea Facebook's newsfeed was algorithmically filtered. These are undergrads at a pretty good school. If 62% of them cannot see this, you know, there's not a lot of knowledge about this. And once again, people will, you know, click on I agree because they don't have a viable choice. Now, there's another interesting thing going here, is that all these platforms have the power of experimentation. Computational experimentation is a different thing than target testing red versus blue, right? I mean, computation it's qualitatively and quantitatively different because in the physical world, you have laws of physics that limit how fast you can do things and how well you can experiment, especially without being noticed. In the online world where you're building the world by code, right, and where it's also private, you're just the only person seeing it, so it's not like 100 people are walking into Target and saying, you know, why are the cashiers all looking very young, right? You don't have such a moment. You have this very private, personal, opaque. You know, it's not public anymore. The way they can manipulate and test things experimentally gives you great power to understand how to change things. Political campaigns are using this. Everybody who wants to sell you something are using this. And I read the trade magazines. You know, Noam Chomsky has this famous quote where he says, I just read the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times. They got to tell the truth, right? Because they're in it to make money. I read the trade magazines, the advertisers. I read what Facebook says to advertisers too. The message is, you can have a lot of power with this data. The message is not, our data doesn't really matter and, you know, we're just serving the public. The message is, you can sell this much better. You can understand how to do this. And a lot of times, they're doing things like, how do we not give consumers the coupon if they're going to buy anyway? How do we increase our margins? How do we increase our sales? I mean, in Facebook's case, and, you know, agree, we're so new that companies aren't just doing it for the money. They're doing it. Their engagement metric is geared towards their real customers, the advertisers. So you have 1.3 billion people whose social experience is being tweaked by a company whose actual customers are their advertisers. Ex-Silicon Valley person famously said, the greatest minds of my generation are trying to figure out how to get people to click on an ad. Now, Facebook, again, to their credit, is not rolling over to advertisers as much as, you know, they could do a lot more, and they're doing a lot of things to safeguard. There's no guarantee that Facebook in 10 years will be the same. The power still will be there. So that's why I'm not comfortable with a trust us approach. Google, by slightly manipulating the search rankings, can also greatly influence your personal reputation, elections, what you purchase, what you think of things. This is real power. Great, don't be evil, but given the information asymmetry, opacity, rapidity of how this happened, we need more than just trust us. It can be a combination of the companies getting together and figuring this out better, external pressures, consumer awareness. It's not an easy solution. So that's, I've kind of disagreed with
and this sets the table for the rest of the panel, so thank you for that. I will say, as a former Dungeons and Dragons nerd, when you said Macebook, I had all these like amazing images of what that's going to be. So I'm going to start coding this afternoon. So Kashmir, I do want to hear your take on the kind of ultimate question. Should we care? But you did a lot of reporting on a lot of these stories. So do people care, right? I mean, so Tal had some data or speculation that maybe a lot of people don't. Zeynep had speculation that not speculation, data about lots and lots and lots of people sending in complaints. Like, did people care about?
So young people care.
These stories? Young people in particular.
Absolutely. Yeah. I always judge like whether people care by how many people click on my stories. Yeah. And a lot of people were clicking on these stories. A lot of people were reading them. People were very interested. And I think there's this distinction between, we're talking about like how this is different from what's come before. Yeah. And there is an assumption or acceptance that it's okay to manipulate us or try to affect us to sell us things or to get us to click on things or to buy things. But what's been different in the recent debate is that the experiments or the manipulation that was happening wasn't necessarily, there wasn't always a business case behind it. It was kind of like, we're doing this because we're interested. The Uber rides of glory, there's no business case necessarily behind that. It was for marketing. With Facebook, there's a little bit of a business case around the emotion manipulation. Part of the reason the researchers said they did it is because there's this, people were saying that people claim that when you went on Facebook, it made you depressed because you saw all the happy things that people were posting and it made you feel worse about yourself. So they said part of the reason we did this study is we wanted to be able to, see if that was true, and hopefully found out that it wasn't, which they did. But there are other studies that they have done where there's just not an obvious business interest. Getting people to go out to vote, that is arguably a public good. And so Facebook was saying, we want to make the world a better place. And so we're going to get people to go out to vote. And there's not really an obvious business reason why they would do that. In another study, Facebook decided to block access to certain things that people posted or just not show them to their friends because they wanted to look at the spread of information across the social network and see if we don't show this, this website this person's posting, will their friends still get that information somehow? And again, there just doesn't seem to be a business case there. So there's this question about like when they should be doing these things and when they shouldn't. And that really struck me as different. And I think it's what created the gray area around this that interested people and kept them coming back to read about these stories and comment on them. And I would argue that people definitely do care. But they have short-term memories, and Facebook is a utility. And I didn't see many people saying, I'm going to quit because this happened.
So, and you're totally within your rights as a journalist to not inject yourself into this, but I'm curious if you want to tell us whether you care or whether you think people should care.
I definitely care. I write so much about the collection of information and how it's used and how it's used to manipulate us. I do care. I think about it a lot when I'm on different websites, when I'm on Facebook, like what I'm seeing that other people aren't seeing. I personally don't put as much personal information into Facebook anymore.
Because of this, or just because of lots of things?
Just kind of in general.
Yeah. So Rob, Zeynep used the word trust a ton when she was talking about this, and whether we should or not. And Tal actually teed it up by talking about trust companies. That obviously has to factor in a lot of the discussions that you guys have. If you lose your customers' trust, you're going to probably lose your customers. So again, I rarely do this as a moderator. I give you the opportunity to just reflect on anything anyone has said, but I'd like you to also focus on that.
Sure. Well, let me start with the trust piece. absolutely trust is critical to what we do. I talked before about the fact that I think we realize every day that if people don't trust us, they'll go elsewhere. If they don't trust us to be good stewards of their information, but also if they don't trust us to give them the information that they're looking for, they'll go elsewhere. And I reacted a lot to what Zeynep had to say because I think there are a lot of assumptions sort of bound up in it. It's like Facebook is a big company and has a lot of users, therefore we shouldn't trust it. I think we try to operate in a way, I mean, both because we have a business incentive to and also because it's the right thing to do. We try to operate in a way that is responsible. And I think, Kashmir, you talked about the reason why the emotional contagion study was done. I think, you can talk about the methodology for the study or how it's communicated or other things. But at the end of the day, if somebody says, like, you're potentially doing something bad to the people who are using your service, and we just ignored it, I think that would be irresponsible too. And so I don't want anything that I say to be perceived as saying, like, we don't feel an immense of responsibility to the people that we serve, because we do. But I also think it's really important to be precise because these are really important questions. And I think a lot of the points that you made they sound alarming, but I don't know that they really that they're really dispositive to a lot of these questions. So Facebook is a big company, and obviously a lot of the reason why people use Facebook is because their friends are there. But if you look at Friendster or MySpace or other social networks came before us, it's not at all intuitive that Facebook will always be the social network. And so it's not the case that we can just sort of sit back on our laurels and do anything. I mean, similarly, you referred to sort of the current approach as a trust us model, and I think the fact that we're all here today, the fact that there was as much reaction to that study as there was, reflects that there's not a trust us model, right? Like, we're being transparent about the work that we're doing. We do lots of publications all the time that people review and comment on and people react to. And I think we feel a responsibility, to be transparent about the work that we do, both sort of in terms of the way that we improve and change Facebook, and then the broader research that we do as well, so that people can react to it. And I think, we were not, I mean, you made this point too, I think it's fair to say we were surprised at the kind of reaction to that particular study that we got and the tenor of the reaction. But the reason why this stuff is published is because we want to be accountable, because, and I think it means that people are holding us to a higher standard. People will be will scrutinize what we do to a greater extent, but I think that's okay and appropriate. And so I don't think it's fair to sort of characterize all of this as a trust us approach. There's a lot of process internally. I know there's a panel later about making sure that we're making good and responsible and consistent decisions. And so again, I think that's right. You talked about de-identification and technologies that can be used. And again, on the study that you're criticizing, there's nobody that data was all de-identified. There's nobody that's criticizing that aspect of the methodology. And so, at least nobody that I've heard. And so, again, I think it's important to be precise. You talked about our privacy policy update, and I think by all accounts that was an improvement on our privacy policy, because a lot of people had said that it was hard to parse and hard to understand. The location stuff that I think you're referring to is an opt-in product that we launched months before the privacy policy change. And so, I mean, again, I think it's tempting to sort of say, like, Facebook is a big company, and Facebook has a lot of users, and therefore we shouldn't trust it. But I mean, we really are trying to do the right thing and trying not. And we have audits that happen of the way that we process people's data by the government. I mean, these are things that go beyond. The FTC is here, and we have an ongoing relationship with the FTC about a lot of this stuff too. I mean, I object to the sort of general characterization, like Facebook is big, so this is a problem. Like, I think these are hard questions, and I think we should be tackling the specific questions that we're presented with.
So I will come back to you in a second. I can tell you're itching to talk, but I do want to, this is a perfect entry point to bring Matthew back into the conversation, right? Because there is one way to reflect on your earlier comments, and I want to hear you talk about the should we care about this. So one way to reflect on it is to say, so Craftsy has two things that Facebook does not, or maybe Facebook has two things that Craftsy does not. One is you're focused on kind of hobbies, as opposed to Facebook, which more directly is about the whole range of like human emotion and communication and relationship. So maybe that's what makes you guys above the fray a little bit. And then the second one is the one that both Zeynep and then Rob just ended on, which is power and size, right? So you don't have a 200 billion market cap, right?
Not yet.
But if you do,
I hope
maybe we would be more concerned about the A/B testing you described. So what do you?
Yeah, so I feel like actually Zeynep's making the argument for Facebook having this information and using it in intelligent ways. Once power has aggregated in an organization or a person or a government, do you really want them to act without good information and analysis? Do you want rulers or people with power to be ignorant of the effects of what they do? Do you want those individuals to make guesses? And it gets back to a point that Rob and I think, agree on deeply. Nobody in any of these organizations or in any legislative body in the world or in this panel can sit down and achieve total prescience about the impacts of whatever they're going to decide. We have to have iterative approaches to product design, to user experience, and to the ways that power is used to affect our lives. And the only way to get feedback is to gather data, and to gather data quickly, and to apply intelligent statistical and analytical techniques to understand the impact of what you're doing. You know, if you think about, I'll scare everybody for a minute, government lags behind everyone on this panel by 40 years. It's not that far off that the US government is going to have all of the data we're talking about every single one of you.
If it doesn't already.
I actually would posit that it's better that they have that information. The problem we have there is that they don't have the ability to easily course correct, right? This is something, again, at my small scale, if we have something out in our website that is not effective or that users aren't engaging with, we can change it. Let's get that off of there. It's not helping anyone. It's not helping the business. People don't like it. We can understand that, you know, at a minute-by-minute scale and respond to it. And if the position of some of these conversations ends up that we all acknowledge somebody's going to end up with power, but let's make them blind and let's hobble their ability to course correct. I mean, I have a fundamental problem with that. That's the exact opposite of what I think. I think that anytime you're making decisions, you need the full range of available information to make good decisions. And it definitely comes back to a basic belief of you're either going to be good or you're going to be bad. And I tend to think that people are going to generally be good. And
all right, so you ended up exactly where I was going to ask you the follow-up, which is, so you've made the case that I guess what you're calling course correction is an essential part of responsible power, but I feel like accountability is another piece of that.
Very much.
And at the very end, you just said, be good and not evil, like it was a riff on the old Google joke, right? I mean, in government, we have things like the Constitution and due process and courts and things like this.
Very much. So I'll talk about that too, because I think there's a distinction here that we can talk about in terms of what came before and what we have now. What came before is all of the information we've talked about could have been known. Someone could hire a private detective to follow you around and know that you're having an affair, know that you like cornflakes, or any of those things were knowable in a very personal way. Today, we can know that in the aggregate. We can know that all left-handed bald guys from Denver like sports cars, right? But that has nothing to do with me. I don't know any of my quilters' names, and I doubt that Rob knows any of his Facebook customers either. But we can understand those trends, and frankly, that creates a level of anonymization that I think is important and that we have to be very respectful of. You know, much like echoing Rob's comments, we take the information we gather about our users very seriously. And we employ an awful lot of techniques to anonymize and to encrypt and to handle that data responsibly. And so for me, that's again sort of a turn on the whole idea. We're gathering all this information, but we're doing it in such an aggregate, you know, statistically flat way that it isn't personal to you. The impact of it is hopefully very personal to you, and that I've created a better experience, or any organization has created a better experience. But it isn't about you, the person. It's about you, the group of individuals.
So Zeynep, once again, lots of direct challenges to some
So
of the things
let's
you've
start with anonymization. Again, I think Ed Felton can talk to this, but 3 pieces of information: gender, zip code, your date of birth. We have 87% of US identified that way. When you have enough data, there's nothing that's not de-anonymizable. I mean, that's just like 4 or 5 pieces of key information, and I have you, okay, left-handed people with a beard, bald, and who are within a mile of this, they probably have everything on you. The data, when it's big enough, is almost certainly de-anonymizable. Should we safeguard it? Of course we should. But it's just this comes with this level of data. When you have this much data on everyone, you can de-anonymize it. That Uber data, let me have it de-anonymized with one more database of any kind, and we will have every politician who's having an affair, maybe 90% within a couple hours. The anonymity is not a good enough protection. Companies should do it, should be careful. It doesn't work, given data. Now, I at no point said we should not research this. In fact, I would like a lot more research into this. What I said is, this is revealing a real power in an environment of information asymmetry and lack of accountability. I also didn't say you guys aren't good. I mean, it's kind of irrelevant to the point. I had this debate with my friends when I criticized the way big data was creeping and changing politics in 2012. So I have a lot of friends in the data science world. I have a lot of friends in the Obama campaign, and they both hated me. They were like, but we're winning on this. I said, I don't care what you personally think. It is not always going to be in your hands. You know, Facebook can be run by angel incarnates, and it doesn't matter. At some point, it's going to become more impersonal. The founder effects in these companies, they do a lot of things. I personally go out and say, I think this is the right thing to do. And I think sometimes they do it in spite of being able to make money more by doing the wrong thing. But again, you know, that's going to not always be the case. These historical trends always work that way. It becomes impersonal, it becomes Wall Street driven, it becomes other things, and we're already seeing a little bit of this. So more research, with more disclosure, with more accountability, with more oversight into these effects is what I actually want. And of course companies should try to figure out how to do the better thing. And yes, throwing darts in the dark is not the way to do it. But the fact that Facebook can potentially influence elections should make us think, okay, what does this mean? And how do we make sure that it doesn't become a thing that they can hold over politicians? Because if they did it in 2016 without telling anyone, with slight tweaks in just the right swing states, because this is all personal. See, on TV, you'd see it. You know, TV ads aren't great, and they have all these pernicious effects through their negativity, but you at least see it. You would not even know. I'm not claiming you would. I'm just saying you could, right? Potentially influence an election. Google could. Maybe Twitter could. I mean, there's all these ways that slight tweaks in a first past the post election could have significant impacts. Now, should you study this effect as you did? Yes. Should you publish about it? Yes. You know, those are good things, because we were kind of suspecting, and I still haven't seen Google publish anything like that, so I would like Google to tell us more. But once you publish, there should be some sort of thing and say, well, maybe there needs to be some industry-wide standards for dealing with this. Jonathan Zittrain proposed information fiduciaries. I mean, on things that are very consequential, like elections. Maybe there should be industry boards. The Princeton group tried to come out with accountable algorithms, ways to figure out if algorithms do what they say they do without revealing your trade secrets, right? There's ways to think about these things. Once we start thinking about the enormous power, and by no means is it just Facebook. I mean, we're here, you're powerful, you're big, you're on the panel, so we're invoking you, and you guys published more, which gives us more insight, which is, again, I think, a good thing. But that means that, you know, Uber, who's going around, they gave access to a job applicant to their right data. And the guy promptly looked up rights of politicians after his interview was over. This is just, I mean, irresponsible. And this is not just Uber. And there's no sort of oversight on all of this. You know, Facebook's good, Uber's bad, Google's good, this is bad. This is no way to deal with the 21st century. So I'm not against research. I am for disclosure. I'm for considering the implications. There's a whole user consent thing we didn't even get into, but I think we're all kind of would obviously agree that if we're experimenting on people on consequential things, there should be some way of thinking about it. You know, there's no one answer to it, but there should be some way of thinking about how do you do this? Do you do opt-in panels? Do you debrief people? You know, if it's more than, you know, making the blue button larger or smaller, if you're changing their feed, what do you do? How do we create algorithmic literacy? How do we create algorithmic accountability? These are big questions. And it's not that I think, you know, everything Facebook has done so far is awful or that Google has done is awful. It's just that, you know, this is a 100-year question we're just stepping into. And we should all think about. And when these companies, because they're held kind of privately by a few people at the moment, they can set the standard beyond them. right? By creating higher standards, because you have the power to do this, you're not yet just a bunch of impersonal shareholders. You guys can set standards in ways that are going to influence whether or not every politician from here on is blackmailable. And I would care about this even if I weren't, it's something to think beyond Facebook, because the kind of personal information you have on people through all these things is just going to get more. And I think the Uber thing was a flashpoint because it was kind of a wake-up call how easy it is to figure a lot of things about them. And what I fear is that the response will be to go completely dark. So we'll just never hear about it. And I think that's the wrong thing. So please do research more, but publish. But don't just say, we publish, therefore trust us, because this is too important. It's bigger than all of us, and it's a long-term issue. So.
Thank you. So I'm anguishing at the fact that I have like 3 other questions I really want to ask, but I'm going to defer to the audience. So ask questions, and then I'll reframe them as my questions. So here at Silicon Flatirons, we have a tradition we call the Wiser Rule in honor of our founder and now the dean of this law school. The way the Wiser Rule works is a student has to ask the first question of every panel. And we're law professors, so we're not afraid to call on students if nobody volunteers. And the second thing I'll give as kind of instruction on audience questions is the moderators will call on people. So please don't yell at Callie over here and ask for the microphone. We'll call on you in due course. So, invoking the Wiser Rule, is there a question from a student for the audience? Oh, thank you. Amber in the back. Wait for the microphone, though, because this is being streamed. And the Twitter feed is awesome. It's exploding. This is like the most active I've ever seen it, and I see names from people thousands of miles away. So thank you for tuning in today.
Thank you all for coming today. This question is directed mostly for Rob, but with welcome comments from the other speakers. How does Facebook, design the algorithm for the manipulation of the feed that people get on Facebook, and why do they design it that way? And then I guess more questions about what the other speakers think about that type of manipulation.
Really good question, and probably a longer question than Paul will let me get away with answering. So let me give a short answer and then a plug for a place where you can find out more. So the biggest thing that influences so as I think people have talked about, it's not a surprise that your newsfeed on Facebook is curated. It's not showing you everything that you're eligible to see. Most people see about 100 stories on Facebook at a typical day. And obviously there are hundreds of thousands of things that you're eligible to see that you might see. And so the biggest factor that influences that is actually the choices that you've made. So the people that you've decided to be friends with, the pages that you've decided to like, the things that you've decided to connect with. That's the strongest signal that we have to show you the things that are relevant to you and that you want to see. I mean, our goal ultimately is that when you go into Facebook and see your newsfeed, the things of all the hundreds of thousands of things that we might show you that are actually the things that are going to be most valuable to you is what comes up first. And so that's the goal. And as I said, like the biggest input into that is the things that you've chosen to connect with. Below that are things like how much other people have engaged with the post. So for example, if we see a post that got 100 likes really quickly, that's going to tell us it's a more relevant post than something that's been sitting around and nobody's engaged with it. So things like that. That's sort of the very superficial answer. We actually are doing a series of blog posts and have been for a while, because the way that we do newsfeed is not a static thing. This is actually something where we try to make improvements to different aspects of it. For example, one thing that we looked at recently was should we, if you had a story in your feed and you didn't get to it, should we pop it back up to the top of the feed the next time, and do people like that? Does that give them a better experience? So things like that. We have a series of blogs. If you go on newsroom.fb.com, there's a link from there. But we actually have a series of blogs that go through in a lot more detail than I've just given exactly how that works.
So the rules for this part of the show, let's keep the answers really crisp. I'm not going to call on individuals so often, but the one follow-up is Amber used the word manipulation, and a few of you have used that word. And in your initial blog post on this, Tal, you said it's manipulation all the way down. Is it a useful term? And throughout the day, we're going to try and draw ethical lines, good and bad. Is it useful to start by saying manipulate your users, bad, change their experience good, or is that kind of an artificial line?
I think there are contexts where it makes sense. So I'm a psychologist by training, and we draw a very strong distinction between an experimental study where you're manipulating something so that you can draw causal conclusions, and an observational study where you're just modeling behavior without interfering. The problem is that doesn't really work in this context, right? So part of the issue is there is no sort of natural environment. There's no natural Facebook experience independent of what Facebook has constructed for you, right? So it's not like you have an expectation that, this is the experience you're going to be presented with, and then how dare Facebook actually tweak it, right? Everything from the very first day has been constructed in a certain way. It's not like you're entitled to expect there is even a timeline, right? That, I think, was introduced at some point. And so, I understand that people have these intuitions that, something has changed and it's not natural. But actually, if you stop to think about it, at least in the online world, it's very hard to find a situation where manipulation means anything other than we changed something, right? Now, in the context of experimental randomized controlled studies, it does mean something. But the question I think you should ask then is it outside the bounds of what the sort of non-controlled manipulation would be, right? So if you're changing something, but you have an A condition and a B condition, but it's exactly the kind of thing someone might otherwise say, well, we're just going to tweak this and see what happens without a control condition, then I think it's not useful to say that's a manipulation, right? So the question really, I think, for this kind of thing has to be about what is the content of the change, and not manipulation in and of itself is, I think, not a useful term.
One thing I find fascinating about that answer, which I think is totally on point, is you now have raised exactly one of the points Zeynep raised for totally different purposes, which is it's the kind of mastery over the laws of nature that make the internet different, right? And so you're using that in service of the argument that they control the laws of nature. So it seems weird to complain about manipulation because they control one more law. And then Zeynep used it earlier to say that's why they have so much power. Yeah. Right? And I think you both can be right, but it's interesting to me it's based on the same core principle. Zeynep, you want to respond as well?
Yeah, there's manipulation everywhere online, and it's asymmetrical and it's one-sided. That's exactly my argument. So I will agree to that. And also, to be honest, the Facebook newsfeed is algorithmically curated or manipulated or constructed, use your word, to keep you on the site longer for advertisements. Yes, it also is the way you connect to people, which is why it's important, right? And this has consequences. You can have television examples. In the 80s, when nuclear war was a real possibility, crazy rulers, they couldn't show a movie on a post-nuclear war Holocaust situation because they would upset advertisers. So they had to show it without advertisement. The most existential issue of the time could not be discussed on television because how do you put car ads in a post-apocalyptic situation, right? The fact that TV industry is fueled by car ads affects how much you can discuss global warming. So our existential questions are being shaped in the TV world. Now we have this everywhere, and how we talk to our friends is being shaped. Facebook's newsfeed only has like. And Rob said he shows what's most valuable to us. Well, a lot of things that are valuable to me are not likable. And I think that's why I didn't get to see a lot of Ferguson news on my Facebook feed, because how do you like a tragedy? I wanted to say important. Facebook doesn't let me say it. I want to say dislike. There's no way to say it. I feel sometimes like I love Facebook for some reasons, but sometimes I step into it and I feel like this is Disneyland. Because it is so, why do you think your Facebook newsfeed is babies, engagement, marriage, babies, engagement? Because the way the algorithm is curated is meant to collect likes and comments. And if you collect likes and comments, it shoots to the top of your newsfeed, which then more people see it and collect. There's a real effect here. It is making your world seem more saccharine than it probably is because people don't click on like on tragedies, sad news, things that are important. And if you did put an unlike button, yes, it wouldn't be pretty and your advertisers wouldn't be happy, but it would be more valuable to me. So when you make a judgment algorithmically and say, this is what's valuable to you, that is not really what's going on. What's going on is we are going to curate this environment so that you stay here, but it is not what's more valuable to me, because if that were true, I would have a lot more ways to give you signals on what I think is valuable. I only can like right now. This is limiting. And I would have more ways to control that newsfeed. If it was really about me, where are my controls?
You have controls. They're news feeds.
I can just like. That's exactly my point.
That's not right, though. I mean,
I can hide, I can comment, I can like. Where's my dislike? Where is my important but unpleasant? Where is my I would like to, have it curated? There's all sorts of, ways of if-then statements. I have I can signal in a couple of ways that are very structured. And I think if you talk to your users, they want more control. I do interviews. I'm sure you do interviews. I can assure you, if you talk to people and say, would you only like to be able to signal given these 5-6 ways? They would say, no, I would like more signals.
It's an interesting claim, though, because so many people have also said that Facebook's control mechanisms, which there are a lot of them, are a blizzard in
no, the newsfeed algorithm, not the privacy. I want a dislike button. I want important but unpleasant button. I want all sorts of other ways. You got a lot of people. There's tons of things you can do about it.
But so Paul, I think it's a little bit of a superficial answer to say, like, you've got a lot of people, so you can solve this. I mean, I think Paul is right that we've had criticism in the past that's been too hard to do that, and so I think we need to do it in a thoughtful way that's actually usable to people. But when I said you have control, I didn't just mean the like button. So I mean, obviously, likes and comments are part of it. You can choose to hide things from your feed. There's a dashboard where you can look at the different things that are showing up in your feed and decide that you find certain things more useful than others. You can identify people that you're connected with as more or less important to you.
How do I identify, not hide, but push this up? This is important but not likable. And I think you're trying to say something. I mean, I would find that you're using.
I do want to get to one more on this question, but if you have anything really quickly to say about it.
Yeah, I think we're starting to go off in a lot of different directions. And the one word we didn't use on this panel, I don't think, that got used a lot around the debate was guinea pig. And I really think that was what the debate was about is, there's a whole bigger discussion about algorithm privacy, but I don't think the Facebook debate was about privacy. I think they did a really good job in terms of not exposing that kind of information, but it really is about when are we users, when are we guinea pigs, and across like different companies, different sites. The OkCupid study was let's take two people who are not matches for each other according to our own internal algorithms and tell them they are, and then see what happens if they go out on a date. And like that is turning your user into a guinea pig. And so that's kind of what I hope that we talk about a lot today is really stay focused on that idea of is it okay to turn users into guinea pigs?
I consider it a very successful first panel if all we do is ask lots of hard questions that they can answer later on. Lots of hands. James Grimmelman. Over here in the wings. She's right behind you.
So I'm thinking about distinctions that might help us sort out this very large mass of issues, and I'm wondering about which of the following distinctions might be helpful. One of the things we're starting to tee up in Kashmir's comments is between observation, which is most classically a privacy issue, and manipulation, control, experimentation, which involves alterations to the experience. And the other would be the purpose for which research is done. So I can imagine research to improve the user experience as they themselves report it, spam filtering, etc. I could imagine things done for corporate self-interest, to make advertisers happy by providing appealing options for showing to users. I can imagine the broader social good, encouraging people to vote, encouraging conversations among those with diverse interests, even if they might themselves prefer dancing pigs. I could imagine advancing knowledge in general. That's what we get from doing a study on emotional contagion. I could imagine entertainment or PR, which is the only value I can see in the Uber Rides of Glory examination. And I can imagine personal frolic and detour by employees who are abusing their access to the data to do things like look up where their friends have taken rides. And I wonder if we might make progress by trying to say these different purposes should be thought about differently.
Right, so this was my earlier plea for a taxonomy, which none of you took me up on. James has given us an elaborate taxonomy, not really quite a taxonomy yet, a big jumble of different possibilities. Are there can you pick a pair out of there that seem really distinctive to you? We have certain ethical conceptions about this one and very different ones about this one, right? Let's look for black and white now, and we'll let the nuance come in later. The shades of gray. Yeah, Tal.
So I definitely have views about what is okay and what is not. But I do think the only point I want to make is and I'm not a lawyer, but it seems like if you're going to design some set of regulations or rules, you, as far as you can, would like to design them in such a way that intention is not a part of it, right? I mean, to me, it's kind of problematic if whether we think something is right or wrong depends on whether a data scientist at Facebook wanted to do this for this reason or that reason, right? So, and that's not to say that you can't make judgments that this was right, this wasn't, but if you're going to build ways we kind of regulate this, then as far as possible, let's make it so that you can make that judgment without having to know what was in the head of the person who, were they just trying to snoop around? And so you can say, look, you can't use individual information within the data set that's not de-anonymized. And then you get away from this problem of I think that's probably the policy that Facebook has.
But is that true even in extreme cases? So he used my favorite law phrase, which we talked about last night at dinner, frolic and detour, right? so if an employee is doing something to kind of check up on their ex-spouse, that maybe objectively looks like research. Shouldn't we consider that? Like that? Doesn't that level of intent matter on some level, or is that not intent?
Well, I guess what I'm saying is I think that, to me, that's something you would, and I think that is in pretty much every company's policy, right, is you can't do that internally. Yeah. And for a very good reason. But so it doesn't become a judgment about whether this is okay or not morally. Like you can do it if you want, and then we'll decide whether you should have done it or not, right? That's the kind of thing that should be from the get-go. And I think, again, there's isolated cases where I think there has been a justifiable uproar about leaks of this kind, but by and large, I think, as I think came up earlier, privacy is not the, I think Kashmir just pointed, privacy is not the issue by and large. People generally think these companies do a good job of maintaining users' information private. The question is what they're doing with it in the aggregate and how they're using it to tailor the experience. At least in this case, I think that's more of the debate.
So the red light is on, but if anyone else wants to respond to this question, or if you're dying to say one last thing in 140 characters or less, this is your last chance, or we can just thank you. Any last?
Yeah, I got it, because I think there's a question on that distinction between observation and manipulation, experimentation, whatever. There's this thing called the scientific method. The way we arrive at understanding and truth is by observation and experimentation. You can observe something all day long, and you won't actually learn a thing about it. You'll learn exactly what you learned 12 hours after you started observing it, what you knew in the first second of observing it. There's a little bit of nuance there, but the way we actually arrive at higher truths in our society and in our way of thinking about life is we observe things, and then we introduce small change, and we observe the results of that change. And so making a distinction between observation and experimentation is, I think, an artificial distinction that doesn't help us at all. Now, in all cases, we have to be responsible with both the observation and the experimentation that we do, but the idea that those things are separate is an idea I think that I personally reject. You don't go anywhere just observing.
Kashmir looks like she wants the very last
Go
word.
ahead.
I just can't wait until browsers, we're playing around with do not track. I can't wait till we have a do not experiment button.
That'd be awesome. That is a perfect place to end.
That would be great.
Please join me in thanking the first panel. I appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right, so you all have a break. This was an innovation Wendy Seltzer invented. We used to never give bathroom breaks until she was here for a year. So be back a little bit after the top of the hour, and we'll start the second panel. Thank you.